Good evening and welcome. My name is Donna Lee, President of the Northeast Ohio Music Teachers Association, and on behalf of our Executive Board, we are honored to present to you a virtual recital by renowned pianist Daniel Shapiro. Dr. Shapiro is a member of the Northeast Ohio MTA and is on the piano faculty of the Cleveland Institute of Music. A noted interpreter of Schubert, Brahms, and Beethoven, Dr. Shapiro is the winner of the William Kapell International Competition and is sought worldwide as a dedicated pedagogue who helps students attain a deep understanding of the works they study. In celebration of the 250th birth anniversary of Beethoven, Dr. Shapiro will be performing all 32 piano sonatas during the 2020-21 season. Tonight, the Northeast Ohio MTA will be presenting the second recital of this project, hosted by Steinway Piano Gallery in Boston Heights. Tonight's program includes Sonatas Opus 31, numbers 1, 2, and 3, and Opus 13, the Pathetique Sonata. Thank you for joining us this evening, and please subscribe to our channel. We hope to bring engaging and interesting programming for our students and teachers in our beloved community. Also, please check out the description box below if you would like to make a donation for tonight's recital. And now, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Andrew Fox, Artistic Advisor of the Northeast Ohio MTA and President of the Ohio Music Teachers Association, for a pre-concert talk with Dr. Shapiro.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. This evening's piano recital will feature 4 sonatas by Beethoven. During the first half, we will hear Sonata number 16 in G major, Opus 31, number 1, followed by Sonata number 17 in D minor, Opus 31, number 2, the Tempest. And during the second half of the program, Dr. Shapiro will perform Sonata number 18 in E-flat major, Opus 31, number 3, and finally, Sonata number 8 in C minor, Opus 13, known as the Pathetique Sonata. I am here with Daniel Shapiro to discuss a bit about his program, Beethoven, and being a pianist. So Dr. Shapiro, thank you so much for agreeing to perform this evening and also to speak with me. I had several amazing years as your student during my doctoral degree at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I'm glad to call you a friend and colleague today. So I wanted to get right to my first question, which is, you are in the process of performing the complete 32 Beethoven sonatas across a series of recitals. Why did you specifically choose to match these 4 sonatas together for tonight's program?
First of all, before I answer, I want to thank you and thank the Ohio Music Teachers Association for presenting this recital. It's a great opportunity for me and for us to hear Beethoven, and also I'm so glad we had those years to work together and get to know each other. I'm very grateful for those, and long live our friendship in the future. As to how I picked these 4, it's hard to say these 4 in particular because I had to figure out a grand scheme for all 32. And it was sort of like a puzzle. You know, I had all these slots and I had to figure out if this sonata goes here, then that one has to go there. And I had to do things like, if possible, avoiding repetition of the same key. And also, this time around, I wanted to try to keep sets of an opus together because I think it's fascinating to see, when Beethoven gives a set of 3, as in the case of Opus 31s, how we find such, in this case, variety within one opus. He wanted to show the variety that he could do. So I wanted to present this kind of approach for the audience. So it was that, and just making sure that every program was balanced in length and moods and variety of character, and just kind of worked out that these 4 would, Opus 31s would be together. And I guess also all 3 of these Opus 31s are not terribly short, so the one that would go with it would have to be among the shorter ones. And so the Pathetique is not among the most shorter ones, but it's certainly not one of the longest. So.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I was curious, what are some of your very first experiences with Beethoven sonatas, both from the perspective of a listener and also as a player?
That's a good question. I just recall hearing them performed in these studio recitals of one of my first teachers, Joanna Hodges. We would have monthly recitals, and I heard a certain number of Beethoven sonatas there, and I would occasionally hear recitals. I was growing up in LA. We would go to the Music Center in downtown LA and hear some famous artists, and I heard Barenboim play and Rudolf Serkin and some other, luminaries like that. So, and then I just kind of started delving in, uh, and I've always had teachers from what you could call, very loosely speaking, the Schnabel school. People who were studied with students or students of Schnabel, and for whom this approach of playing, this repertoire, or as Schnabel put it, music that is better than can be played. So the Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert kind of rep. So I was always focusing on this rep from an early age.
Mhm. And of the sonatas that you're going to be performing this evening, is there one in particular that requires more practice time or more study than others, or are they all pretty equal? Or what's the experience like preparing these four sonatas?
I would say in this particular group of four, they are about equivalent in terms of just technical difficulty. Uh, I would say that, what do we say, metaphysically, spiritually speaking, uh, no, they all have their challenges, even that way. I think to a certain extent, realizing the full measure of greatness of the Tempest maybe took me the longest time to come to. Uh, 31 number one isn't played all that often, and I played it when I was fairly young. I think when I was 14 or so, so I've always been very fond of it. And I think it's one of the greatest of the sonatas, even though it's often overlooked. Yeah, all of these sonatas take a certain amount of time to learn and a certain amount of maintenance practice to, make it sound reasonably tolerable for an audience. But they take, a lifetime of reflection and re-reflection and re-reflection.
Mhm. And so why specifically for you the Beethoven sonatas, with all of the vast piano literature out there and the different cycles from performing, the well-tempered clavier or the complete English suites or so on? What kept drawing you throughout your life back to these Beethoven sonatas as a central investment of your artistic life, so to speak?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. More than, as I was saying, I was always studying with teachers that emphasized this repertoire. Uh, and when I was studying with Leon Fleischer, I certainly wanted to study a lot of Beethoven with him. The teacher, and then John Perry, same thing. He's a wonderful Beethoven player. And Joanna Graudon, who was another student of Schnabel. So I came to realize, having studied a few sonatas with each of these wonderful teachers, that I had about 2/3 of them or so under my belt, and that since I love the music very much, why not learn the rest? So I did, and I hadn't yet learned the harmonicklavier. That took a few years, so it was kind of happenstance, just as a result of my background and my training, and then realizing that I was close and I could, why not finish the job? That's about as good an answer as I can give you. 'Cause, I mean, I love Schubert's music and play a lot of his, and Brahms and Schumann and so forth. So there you have it, best I can.
Okay, sure, yeah. And what about the sonatas that you're actually going to be performing in the first half of the program this evening? Can you tell us a little bit specifically about these pieces and also where they fall in Beethoven's compositional evolution and in his life story. So just give us a little bit of background about what we're going to be hearing.
Okay, well, first of all, I guess we could say that this was right around the time when Beethoven said he wanted to embark on a new path forward in writing sonatas. So there is a level of formal and musical sophistication that not that it wasn't there before, but that is height starting from Opus 31, and we're now close to the so-called middle period where he achieves real mastery, and so that is kind of the basis for where we are at in terms of his overall development. Now, the pieces in particular, Opus 31 number 1, as I mentioned, I think is one of the greatest of the sonatas, even though it's not played very much. And one is, what makes it great, if I could find the right words, is the spiritual place that he's in writing this piece. Because this is, for a larger part of it, this is a hilarious piece of music. And so he was not above finding humor as an exalted state of spiritual being to be in. And he didn't feel that one has to transcend the audience or himself or the listener only through tragic music, but it could also be done through humor. And of course, the apotheosis of this will eventually become the Diabellic variations. But the first movement of this piece is actually a very silly piece. And what he's doing is essentially he is intentionally writing what might at first sound like bad music, kind of square and kind of crudely constructed. But we realize that it's actually ingeniously constructed, and the way he makes fun of bad writing is hilarious. And so it's, aside from a few kind of obvious giggly moments near the end, just the whole thing is just kind of absurd. There's an absurd opening theme, which gets presented basically something like 7 times in its original form, if you take the repeats, which I will. And it's just, ridiculous, but that's the genius of it. The second movement, is one of the great second movements. It's also the only piece of music in all of existence that I'm aware of that has the tempo marking adagio grazioso. You may find andante grazioso or allegretto grazioso, but never adagio grazioso. Several commentators have thought of this movement as also as a kind of parody of opera seria and so forth, and there are a lot of florid runs that kind of sound like that. But in a way, I think that misses the point a little bit. I think that the humor of the first movement elevates us into a kind of heightened, ecstatic state of being, and that gives us this wonderful feeling for Adagio Grazioso. And so for me, it's really a transcendent movement. It's not buried in sorrow like the slow movement of the Harper Clavier or something like that, but it is in its own way uniquely great. It's not funny, but it doesn't frown. And then even along the same lines, the third movement inhabits a kind of lighter, purer air. It's lifted up into this playful, light, almost childlike quality, and it shimmers. So the thing taken as a whole, and also the key, G major, has a special color, not only for Beethoven, but for even Bach and Mozart before him, this kind of somehow earthy yet shimmering quality that you find in the Fourth Concerto and Mozart 453 and the Bach Fifth French Suite and things like that. So it's a wonderful key and an absolutely wonderful sonata. The Tempest, almost couldn't be more different. And, it's a well-known piece, and we all know that it's a very dramatic piece and all that kind of thing. But I'm realizing more and more just how profoundly great a masterpiece this is. And I don't necessarily know how I could put it into words, but it's really has deep tragic implications involving struggle against fate and all this kind of thing. Uh, and it's really a extremely intense piece, all three movements together, and all three movements really form a complete whole. Uh, 31 number 3 has also a lot of humor, but it's a more kind of an affable uncle-like or grandfather-like humor. It's not quite as silly for the most part as what you find in 31 number 1. And but it smiles all through all four movements. There's not really a slow movement, and there's really nothing in minor keys. It's all again, all four movements complement themselves perfectly. In that sense, it's a little reminiscent. I guess reminiscent isn't the right word because it hasn't been written yet, but it reminds us of the piano trio Opus 70 number 2, also in E flat major, also in four movements, none of which are slow, none of which are in minor key or anything like that. But somehow Beethoven makes a whole universe of these four movements in both cases. The second movement he calls the Scherzo, although it's in 2, and we hear 3 horns accompanied by a bassoon. It's not it's sometimes referred to as the hunt, because there's a lot of hunting horn sound, especially in the last movement, and a lot of sounds of horns, and generally the feeling of being outdoors in all of these movements. The third movement is really kind of a horn solo. You could easily hear a horn player playing it. The second movement, I might say, if I may, that I think is often played much too fast, and hopefully I will not play it too fast. Hopefully I won't play it too slow either. But I think the humor of it with that chortling bassoon underneath it is lost if it gets played too fast. The third movement can be thought of as a kind of inside-out minuet in trio. Minuets usually had a trio, and originally a trio was actually a trio. It would be 3 players playing, or at least a reduced number of players playing compared to the minuet. And the third movement of the sonata begins with a trio, a lyrical line, and there are 3 voices going on, and then the so-called trio really sounds like a minuet. It's very elegant and poised and so on. So I don't know if this was intentionally done by Beethoven, but I almost have a feeling that maybe it was. And so it's kind of a backwards or inside out minuet. And the last movement is an absolute romp. It's one of these village dances that you have in things like the last movement of the Seventh Symphony and the last movement of the Kreutzer Sonata, where everybody's out and maybe everybody is half drunk and people are clapping their hands and holding their hands while the round people go through and all that kind of thing, and just revelry, in the village. So it's a lot of fun to listen to and a lot of fun to play, although it's not easy. So, yeah, the variety and richness in the Opus 31s is really astonishing.
Fantastic. Okay, well, my last question for you before we get started with hearing the first 2 sonatas from the Opus 31 set is, even though these pieces, all the ones that we're going to be hearing this evening, were written in the late 1700s or early 1800s, we're recording this program at the end of October 2020. And so I was wondering what role these Beethoven sonatas play for us as individuals, as a culture, and as a society during this time. So what can we all take away and learn from this music of Beethoven?
When Beethoven himself viewed his own mission as composing for humanity, humanity present and humanity of the future, and he spoke in those terms. And his music really addresses all of humanity, I would say. And there is not only a spiritual, but also an ethical and moral dimension to his music. we feel that it represents a better world, and I think somehow in hearing this music, to a certain extent, it reminds us of what idealism can be, and should be, and what ethics and humanity can be and should be. And so I think in these troubled times, as much as ever, Beethoven's music is vitally important. And my mission, I believe, is to present this music in that light as absolutely relevant for these reasons. I wish I don't have it with me. There's this wonderful quotation of Beethoven that he talked about his music as beyond knowledge, but when people drink of his music, they become intoxicated, full of kind of awareness of the world. And I think it's true in his music. And I think that's what makes his music worthwhile trying to play and worthwhile listening to.
Beautifully said. Well, on that note, we are going to get to the first half of this program. I will be joined by Dr. Shapiro again after the first half. I hope that you all enjoy the recital, and we will see you again at intermission. Welcome back. I'm here again with Dr. Daniel Shapiro to continue our discussion from earlier in tonight's program. Dr. Shapiro, I wanted to ask you, this is the third time in your life that you have performed the complete cycle of Beethoven sonatas, which is a remarkable achievement by any standards. I'm wondering how your performances and interpretations have evolved throughout your years of continuing to explore these masterworks.
Well, I hope they've gotten better. uh, I've matured, I've evolved, I've been thinking about these pieces, teaching them, practicing them, playing them for, the first cycle was, I think, 25 years ago or so. Uh, I've gotten married, raised children, and that life knowledge, I think, I hope somehow permeates its way into interpretations. So it's just, I think, natural involvement. But yeah, it's rethinking the pieces, re-examining assumptions, trying to start as if from a fresh slate for each sonata, as if I'm learning it anew, uh, as much as possible. And also, let's see, smaller issues, mostly smaller issues. I have now better editions. There's now this new Baron Writer edited by Jonathan Delbar, which is terrific. Um, and I've become more and more, aware of and interested in some of the finer details. But I think probably if I listened to the first cycle, it was probably very energetic and exciting and all that, but probably didn't have the sophistication and the attention to subtlety of many of the details that hopefully I now possess. So, but most of it, yeah, is trying to keep an open mind and trying to somehow subconsciously channel all that I've learned in life and about meaning into these pieces.
Hmm. Sure, yeah. So, as this is an event for the Northeast Ohio Music Teachers Association, there will be a lot of students and teachers watching this performance. And I was wondering if you could spend a few moments just discussing practicing, and perhaps even more specifically, how you would advise the approach to learn a Beethoven sonata.
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it depends on the level of the student, the age of the student. But essentially, the first thing one should do, I think, is simply take the music, open it up, and without any preconceived notions, meaning without having listened to any recordings, just start scratching away at it and learning it, learn the notes, but obviously every single last detail, hopefully from a good edition, not from a free download, which are usually bad, not from an edited performance, so-called performance edition. The wonderful is, for example, Schnabel's edition is it's still the point of view of Arthur Schnabel. So you want to have a good word text, and so one sets forth and one begins to not only learn the notes, but one starts to has to start to figure out how music is organized, uh, the logic of the music, the structure, if you will, of the music, the form, uh, and that can sometimes seem like an academic exercise, but it doesn't have to be. But it's also good to ask oneself some questions as one's studying these pieces. One is for every marking that one sees, whether it's a dynamic marking or an expression marking, one should ask oneself, why did Beethoven spend the ink and the effort to put it there? What is this purpose? What does that tell you about, uh, you know, this particular instant or passage? Uh, and then after a while, and this is a little more abstract in a sense, it takes more time, I guess. One has to sort of, Beethoven's music is so wonderfully architectural, and one always has a feeling of being in a well designed edifice where we know our orientation within the building. And so one has to try to figure out the role of each little part, its function within the whole, uh, and and that's another part of it. Um, and it's also very good to not listen to recordings of the sonata that you're studying, but to listen to his other music, his symphonies, his string quartets, especially those, uh, and so that we learn, more about his personality and the way he's thinking and things like that. Um, and Any kind of practice we do, no matter how mechanical it may seem, it might have to be, always has to be done with some kind of expressive purpose in mind. So even if one's practicing, a difficult passage slowly, one has to practice it beautifully, expressively, which may involve some thought. Where does the phrase go? How should it be shaped? How are the notes organized? What notes belong together? My teacher Leon Fleischer would often put these arcs in the music, which aren't meant to be slurs. They just show what notes are grouped together, belong together as a unit of thought. Uh, and one can do that when you have a pencil around and you can say, okay, these belong together, and then the next group starts there. And sometimes even at a small micro level, you can do that. And sometimes what can seem like an insurmountably difficult passage, if you really look at what's there, and what's being expressed, then pretty soon one can make headway in it. Maybe I should, as an example, there's this famous passage in the Farewell Sonata. It's difficult no matter what you do. Uh, and one can practice it, and play it over and over until you're blue in the face, and it may never fly in the performance. But if you really look at what's there, if you look at the motives and the harmonies, then you start to see how it's put together, and you see that there's this label motive upside down, and so forth, and then you hear it that way, and then it makes sense, and then one can start to play it more musically and more consistently. Uh, so it's not only just pure manual training; it's how the ear hears it, and the ear directs the hand. So anyway, those are some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I remember having many conversations about just those topics when I used to study with you. Yeah, I want to pivot back to the program this evening. We talked about the Opus 31 sonatas earlier on, but the last the last sonata on the program tonight is the Pathetique. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this sonata.
Yeah, Beethoven had in mind to make a big statement. He called it Grand Sonata, and it's in his sort of signature key of C minor, with all of its fatalistic and tragic overtones, and so forth. And many of his most famous pieces, the Fifth Symphony, the Third Piano Concerto, Opus 111, and the Coriolan Overture, C minor Violin Sonata. They all have a certain similar terrain of this brooding, dark, you know, Beethoven as sort of he's popularly thought of in in our culture. Uh, but I think already, and this is obviously an earlier work than the Opus 31s, but it is remarkably far ahead looking and mature in the degree to which he understood, shall we say, the tragic fate of us all, and the depth to which he understood and conveyed that in this sonata. Uh, and Already in introduction, we feel this struggle between fate and fighting against fate, you could say. Uh, I might also say something that's generally true for much of his music, very true of this particular piece. One has the feeling that his motives, his musical ideas, are, in a sense, philosophical concepts clothed in tones. That when he writes that, I mean, I'll throw a cliche possibility or two. We must fight onward. We must believe in the truth. It may not be that, but it's something like that. That he didn't use words to, but he felt that he could bring that meaning across through tones. And so this piece is idealistic in that it deals with ideas in that sense. We feel this very much in this piece, first one especially. The second movement is an A flat major, and it's interesting. You may have heard me say this before, but we think of Beethoven mostly as a composer of motives. That he's not considered to be a melodist the way Schubert or Mozart or Verdi is, and something like this. I mean, it's easily singable, but it's not a gorgeous tune in the sense of a gorgeous tune. The exception to that general rule is when Beethoven happens to be in the key of A flat major. And for some reason, this key, the warmth of this key with four flats, seems to make him pour out of himself all these most gloriously beautiful melodies. First Concerto, second movement, Opus 110, Fifth Symphony, slow movement. Just these most glorious melodies. And those of us old enough to remember this second movement theme was the theme song of a very popular radio show called Inventors in Good Music with Karl Haas that was on for about 20 or 30 years. Unfortunately, it wasn't very well played, but but this is the warmth and humanity that this movement expresses is so deep and so satisfying. It was often typical, we found this in Opus 31, number 1, that a rondo will be lighter, that this shift of emphasis, at least in the earlier part of the middle period, was in the first movement or first two movements, and the last one would be lighter. This movement is lighter, but there are some tragic implications which we sense that are in the air, and then they come into fruition by the end of the piece. And it's interesting, there are sort of three climaxes culminating in fermatas in this movement. And in its own way, it's a mini version of looking forward to what Mahler did in the last movement of his Sixth Symphony, where he has the three hammer blows of fate. So you have these 3 points of great, calamity in this movement, the last one being the biggest. So it ends up being a very tragic conclusion, a tragic movement for this tragic in the best sense of the word sonata.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, we are going to get back to the second half of the program. On behalf of everyone at the Northeast Ohio Music Teachers Association, I want to thank you so much for providing this wonderful and spiritual evening of music. And also to all of you watching from home, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. And I hope that you all enjoy the second half of this program.
Thank you all for listening. And thank you, Andrew, for the chance to talk about this.
this will be a little bit of that, one of the bagatelles from Opus 126.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed tonight's performance. Please subscribe to our channel and check out the description box if you would like to make a donation for tonight's recital. On behalf of the Northeast Ohio Music Teachers Association, we thank you and wish you a good night.